Jake here, TrendSpider, to go over the weekend update into the second half of April. But before I do that, just wanted to quickly mention we do have a weekend deal going on. It is a $500 Elite annual plan. That's about $280 in savings. So if you guys do want to check that out, the first 50 signups get a free swag pack. So if you do want to finally give TrendSpider a shot, now is the time. This is only a weekend deal. So let's jump into some charts here. So starting with SPY, you'll see here that the whole month of April has been absolutely huge. And you can see that the April seasonality over the last 5 years really told us that. Going into April, we knew that there was a 100% win rate so far in the last 5 years. So we knew not only were the technicals setting up, but also the seasonality was setting up as well, and that was a great way to get an edge in this current market. So one thing to note now, though, is we are starting to get pretty far outside of these monthly Bollinger Bands, but also note that this has been happening now since November, and you can see that we poke our head above, pull back, poke our head above, pull back. So is this just another poke our head above, pull back, and then continue up? We'll have to see. But you can see that over the last 2 or 3 years, anytime we did poke our head above this area, there was a pretty sharp decline. So keep that in mind going into the weeks ahead after 4 really strong weeks in the market. Going into the Qs, we have something relatively similar, but we actually have some room to move to the upside here on the Qs. You'll see here that the upper Bollinger Band is still way up here in the 355 to 360 area. And that's something that is worth noting because this does show that the Qs do have a little room to move up. And same thing, going into April, you can see that we've just had 3 very solid weeks here. That's right in line with this really strong seasonality for April over the last 5 years. So keep that in mind going into the rest of April. But also keep in mind that if the S&P is a little overextended, that could go into the Qs if we did get some selling there. So we'll just have to see what happens. This is always a great way to just create an alert at any line that you're watching. In this case, if you were watching the upper Bollinger Band here, this is when you can put an alert on that upper band, add some sensitivity, or simply just add a breakthrough, which means you wouldn't really need sensitivity. You can just be alerted anytime the price actually breaks through this line, and that's a great way to get set up into the week ahead or really at any time frame. If you're even scalping or day trading, you can put these alerts on shorter term time frames and get ready for the next hour ahead. So just keep that in mind when you are using the platform. The alert system is a great thing to check out. Now going into IWM did not have the same kind of move that we saw in the SPY and the Qs in the last, let's say, 3 weeks. And so one thing I want to point out here is the anchored volume by price. If we anchor from the COVID lows here, you'll see that we really ran into some pretty heavy supply, and we've pretty much just been chopping around now for the last really 2 months. We haven't really made any progress here. So one thing I want to point out, as I mentioned, with SPY and the Qs, April has a very strong win rate. So you can see here that over the last 5 years, 100% win rate for April. So if we did start to break through this volume shelf and really start to get through that supply above, this could act as an area as a base for price, or if we want to call it a launch pad for price, going into the second half of April. But for now, it is acting as a pretty heavy supply above. Now going into the VIX, VIX is one that is right in line on the seasonality side with the broad markets, except the opposite, where the VIX has a very low win rate, which would make sense if all the other ETFs have a very high win rate, since these are oppositely related or have an opposite relationship. So you can see here that only a 17% win rate over the last 5 years. If we turn on the gap snake, we've been watching this gap finally fill now for the last 3 weeks. It just filled about 3 weeks ago and continues to just melt down. And if you keep in mind though what the VIX was at over the last several years, this is still relatively high. I remember back when a spike to 16 or 17 was a big move, and now we're just melting down to this area now. So the VIX does have more room to move down if we continue to melt up in the broad market. So BTCUSD Bitcoin is the next one to take a look at. You'll see here that Bitcoin definitely tried to get through some of this resistance here. We're going to call it the 5.618 extension resistance. We did poke our head above. Now we are really having trouble getting through. So it attempted a breakout. The weekly candle's still not over, so that's something to keep in mind as well. And we are simply just measuring that move from the 2019 highs to the 2020 lows, and you'll see we're aligned almost perfectly with that extension. Now, one thing to note on the seasonality side, you will notice that we are slowly declining into the summer months. So if we anchor this even from the December 2017 highs, you'll see that going into May, only a 33% win rate for crypto. So we are starting to move into a little more of a less strong seasonal time of the year, at least for the next month or so. So keep that in mind. And if you do want to kind of track price around this extension, you can always create an alert right at this area as well, just like we did on the upper Bollinger Band on the Qs. Now going into ETH, that's Ethereum. Same thing. We definitely did try to break out, and we're actually holding this one. And we are hitting this 8.618 extension. So anytime you really don't have anything to compare price to before, i.e. pivot points, anything like that happened previously, you really want to use extensions. You want to find this big measured move. In this case, it was the 2019 to 2020 measured move. And you can see that we are touching right at this resistance area. And this extension, if we break through, we'll just add a 9.618 extension. And really, that's all we have to go off of in price discovery mode. So same thing here. If we look back from the 2017 highs, the next 4 months do have pretty low seasonality. So keep that in mind during this huge bull run that we've been on. Maybe a little bit of a pullback, or maybe just some consolidation. But who knows? We're in a very massive bull market right now. We could continue to go up. This seasonality is just something to consider that has happened in the past. Going into the old Doge coins of the world, this is one that has just blown my mind completely. And finally, we are starting to get a little bit of a pullback into the weekend. And you'll see here that we are still above this breakout area, but barely at this point. And you can see here, if we anchor the volume by price from this low, this area did act as a pretty strong volume shelf for price over the last couple weeks. So you can see here that we were really just trading right at this area. You have this volume shelf forming. This is where a lot of shares were holding at break even. That creates a base for price when demand comes in. And then you've got that huge launch pad that we've seen over the last week or so. And so Dogecoin has been quite an interesting thing to watch, especially with the market cap being so big. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, this is just another pump in crypto. Well, this is a little different because this is tens of billions of dollars that are being moved around. Where, you know, most of these crypto pumps generally, you know, don't have that much capital flowing in that quick. So this was pretty fascinating to see, and just you know, something to keep in mind that we are trying to break through this longer term breakout point, but you know, we're pulling back pretty hard pretty quick. So who knows? This could just be something that the party's over. We'll just have to see going into the week ahead. Now the next one we'll look at, these individual names. PLTR is the first one. One thing that I really want to point out here is a couple different things. One, if we anchor the volume by price from this IPO date, you'll see that this area just continues to act as a supply zone. That's exactly what it did this week. If we turn off the volume by price and turn on the insider selling widget, you'll see something pretty interesting, and this probably is not helping price at all. You can see here, if we go to the insider trading widget, click done, you'll see that over the last week or so, we did have some pretty big sells. I mean, $30 million, $14 million. These are pretty big sells, and so this definitely adds supply to the market. And you know, you don't necessarily want to see insiders dumping at this rate, and that's probably why we haven't really had any traction here. It's just it seems like any slight pop is a good opportunity for insiders to sell. The insider selling tool is very helpful to get an idea of what's going on in the inner workings of the company. Going into FUBO, this is one that just absolutely cannot catch a break. We're breaking down right now through this longer term area of support, and you can see here that you know, there are some buys here. However, they happened back in February, honestly near the top. So just keep that in mind going into the rest of the month. Right now, we haven't really had any insider transactions at all, and you'll see here that you know, this is one that's just kind of experienced that weird growth stock absolute meltdown, similar to some of these other ones out there, such as you know, Open, Unity software. I mean, all of these names are just kind of melting. I mean, PLTR is another example of that. So this breakdown is concerning and something to definitely consider going into the week ahead. Now, the next one that we're going to look at is Nvidia, and you'll see here that this has been a really strong mover over the last couple weeks. And one thing that I thought was really interesting was the fact that if we turn on the analyst estimates here, this is another widget in the on the platform. You can see that if we turn on the analyst estimates, you just click events here, you'll see that the near-term bottom on the chart in early March was actually an area where there were a lot of buy ratings that were stacking up. So this is interesting to compare the technicals with the analyst estimates and just overall what you know, these institutions are thinking about these different stocks. So kind of combining non-technicals with technicals is a great way to look at this. And you'll see here that we finally did break through this this February high, so that's something to consider. And really, this was a very crucial area to break through because this is really a range that we've been stuck in now for the last 8+ months. So breaking through this area is definitely a strong thesis for potentially further moves to the upside here on Nvidia. Now, going into apps, APPS. This is one that has had trouble over the last several. I mean, I don't want to say trouble, but it definitely hasn't gone anywhere. And now starting to look like it possibly is in a little bit of trouble here. Same thing, if we want to turn on the seasonality, just add or remove widgets. We'll add the seasonality feature here, and you'll see that over the last pretty much since 2007, April has about a 36% win rate. But we want to know pretty much since the market really turned in 2016, when the trend really changed, you know, how is this performing? And you'll see that April has about a 50% win rate. Not a ton of edge, at least on apps. And that's, you'll sometimes see that. Sometimes these stocks don't really have any seasons, if you will. Some of them are just trading kind of 50-50. And then if you get into, let's say, July and August, you have a much better edge using the seasonality tool. So keep that in mind going into the second half of the summer. This is when seasonality really starts to heat up for apps. But until then, we're pretty much 50-50 or maybe a little bit of an edge in May and June with a 60% win rate. But the main thing here is this ascending triangle on the weekly chart. If we break down through it, that's something to consider. This is when I would anchor a VWAP from the start of this ascending triangle here. And you'll see that this anchored VWAP has acted as a level below back in March. And so if we did break down, this $67 area would be something to consider. We've got this alert below. So remember that if we do get alerted anywhere around this purple area, you need to change your confirmation candle to a lower time frame so you get that alert as quick as possible. So whenever the 30-minute candle closes in this purple area, you'll be alerted. Just click this touch button. That's whenever the price touches anywhere within that purple area, you'll be alerted. And then you set the chart and you forget about it until the price action does its thing. So apps, this is a very crucial area to hold going into the week ahead. Going into the last one, TDOC. TDOC is a great example of using the anchored volume by price and the anchored VWAP to see these volume shelves forming. So if we turn on the volume by price, you'll see here that we do, I want to anchor from this very low point here in 2018, and you'll see something really interesting. You'll see that we do have this base forming, and if we turn on the anchored VWAP here, we do have, let's see, I have to remake it, which is fine. You guys can see how I do this. So I have a 5% offset on the anchored VWAP. Why? Well, you'll see here that if we create an anchored VWAP, notice that we didn't get all the way down to this line. So if I right click and go to properties, I can add something called the percent offset, and it just says percentage here, and then you choose your offsets, and we'll just do a 5% offset, make the rest 0. And you'll see here how this creates more of a zone around the anchored VWAP. So this is something that's nice, especially when your anchored VWAP is not acting perfectly with price, which rarely does it act perfectly with price or any indicator or level for that matter. So you can see here a nice bounce right off of that 5% offset on the anchored VWAP. Something to consider is we do have a gap below shown by the gap snake, the automated gap detection that we have on TrendSpider. But, you know, that's really low, and that's likely something that probably will not fill. I mean, anything's possible in the market. We already saw that with Dogecoin this week, but that gap is something that would, be over a 50% move down from this point in time. So seems pretty highly unlikely, but always worth noting the gaps below and the gaps above on a chart. You can see that the seasonality is relatively strong going into these early spring or late spring, early summer months, with an 80% to 100% win rate all the way until July here using the seasonality tool. So definitely something to keep in mind with the seasonality. It's not an end-all be-all, but it's definitely a great tool to use when pairing with technical analysis. So hopefully this weekend update was useful for everybody. Remember, we do have that deal going on right now. The $500 Elite annual plan, usually $780, only $500 this weekend. And we do have, as I mentioned, these free swag pack for the first 50 signups. And if you guys have any questions, let us know. If you do enjoy these videos, make sure to like and subscribe. And everybody have a great weekend.